America on Two Wheels presents a Forest Moto Adventure, a completely made-up version of what may have happened on that weekend late last year, by Chris Goodrow. A special thanks to Patrick, Roger, Dave, and Frank for their contributions. All persons, names, and events contained in the story are fictional and in no way are meant to represent any person or creature, living or dead. The forest was already darkening when the four men cut their motorcycle engines. Chris, Patrick, Roger, and Dave had been riding old Forest Service roads all morning. Nestled between pine, cedar, and mountain laurel, many of these roads had disappeared from maps decades ago. The air smelled like damp earth and sap, and the only sound left after the engine stopped was the wind brushing the treetops. Patrick had been leading the group along a route that he had discovered in an old topographical map dated years ago. Up until now, Chris had exactly one rule for motorcycle trips: never trust Patrick's shortcuts. But if it hadn't been for Patrick's decision to ride those old service roads, they would have never ventured into this mysterious place. "This looks like a great place to camp for the night," Patrick suggested. The group agreed and began to select their tent sites. Patrick, of course, choosing the largest and flattest in the area for his Tajma tent, as his fellow riders sometimes called it. "Did you hear that?" Roger asked. At first, Chris thought it was just the forest settling, branches creaking, leaves shifting. Then it came again, a deep, low thump, like something heavy stepping on the ground, far off on the trail. Patrick laughed nervously. Probably a deer or a bear. But Chris wasn't so sure. The sound was too slow, too deliberate. He then imagined Dave trying to wrestle a bear. Not a good idea. He quickly got that image out of his head. They decided to start riding their bikes again, riding deeper into the woods as the afternoon sun began to descend toward the horizon. Their headlights cut narrow tunnels through the trees, shadows jumping wildly as they passed. As they got further from the campsite, suddenly Roger skidded to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Between the trees stood a massive shape, taller than any man, covered in light brown, shaggy hair. It didn't move at first. It just watched from behind the large cedars. The engines idled. No one spoke. Then the creature stepped forward, revealing himself. The ground seemed to shake. Its eyes caught the headlights for a moment, reflecting like amber. It let out a low, echoing call that rolled through the forest like thunder. "That's not a bear," Roger whispered. The men knew the stories and lore of Bigfoot, but none of them really believed the stories were true. The figure didn't attack. Instead, the creature immediately raised its hands, palms out like, "Whoa, calm down." It tilted its head, almost curious, and then took a step back into the trees. It seemed to want them to follow it. There was an awkward silence. For several seconds, the men sat frozen, bikes still idling. Finally, Chris said, "If he wanted to hurt us, he would have easily done it by now." "I think he wants us to follow him," Patrick stated nervously. The men reluctantly agreed, shutting down their engines and dropping their kickstands. They walked toward the creature. He turned away and walked slowly ahead. All the while, the men kept a safe distance. Several times, the thing looked back at them, and they swore he appeared to be grinning. Eventually, the woods thinned, and the thick canopy of trees opened up above them. They entered a field which seemed to be in the middle of nowhere, inaccessible by any road. Although he would only grunt and snort, he was able to communicate through hand gestures and oftentimes comical facial expressions, like a dog who hears a strange sound for the first time. They continued on foot. Ahead in the distance sat a small cabin with an unusually large door. The creature opened the door and walked inside. He turned and waved his giant hand, indicating for them to come in. The cabin seemed disproportionately larger inside than out, very deceiving. A wooden table with oversized chairs was in the middle of the room. A stone fireplace was located along the back wall. It seemed to have been recently stoked. The fire inside felt warm and inviting. Along another wall were beds made of evergreen boughs piled on a rustic-looking wood post frame. They looked surprisingly comfortable. Patrick thought it was strange that there were two beds, but hesitated to ask who or what the other bed belonged to. The creature then donned a sleeveless vest. He presented large mugs for the men filled with rather pungent but surprisingly palatable brew. The men watched as Bigfoot drank from his mug first. He then indicated for the men to drink as well. All four took their first gulp, and to their surprise, it was actually refreshing. The creature smiled and seemed pleased to witness the men's enjoyment of the brew. The creature seemed to understand their language, he just wasn't able to form the strange sounding words. Although the men were unable to understand him, they decided to give him a name. Roger suggested Frank. The other men smiled and agreed. Patrick pointed to himself and said, "Patrick." He then pointed to the creature and said, "Frank." The creature produced a sound that must have been his version of a laugh. They all stood there laughing. Roger said, "Okay, Frank it is then." To their surprise, Frank then laid a deck of playing cards on the table. Patrick and Roger both stated, "No thank you, we hate cards." They decided to sit this one out and watch from across the room by the fire, still enjoying the strange brew in their mugs. Chris and Dave decided to try their luck at a few hands of poker. Dave was surprisingly good at poker. Even after losing a few hands, Frank did not get angry. He just seemed happy that someone was actually sitting with him and playing what appeared to be his favorite pastime. A short while later, Roger said, "Dave and I are just going to sit down here, enjoy this beer, and rest our eyes a bit." After the three of them finished playing, Frank suddenly placed his large arm on the table with an enormous thud. He indicated he wished to arm wrestle. Chris smiled and knew he didn't have a chance, but he tried anyways. Naturally, Frank won and laughed at how weak Chris was. The entire group erupted in laughter. Looking up on the wall above the fireplace, Chris noticed a handmade wooden fishing rod. Chris pointed to the rod and asked, "Did you make that?" Frank smiled and nodded, "Yes," and raised his massive hands. Frank then stood from his chair and walked over to the fishing rod, removed it from the wall, and handed it to Chris. Chris admired the craftsmanship and wondered how Frank was able to create such a skilled piece with what he believed was large and clumsy hands. Frank gestured for Chris to follow him outside with the rod. Around the back of the cabin was a small stream that the men had not noticed before. Frank bent over and with one swipe of the ground with his massive hand unearthed a worm. He was able to secure the worm on the hook with amazing dexterity despite the size of his hands. This helped Chris understand how Frank was able to craft the rod. The two stood beside the creek and tried their luck at fishing for a while. Meanwhile, Patrick went outside to record a short clip for his YouTube channel, Moto Ramblings. "My viewers are never going to believe this," he said. A short while later, without a single bite, the two decided to return inside. Chris thanked Frank with a big hug. Frank and Chris returned inside to find the three men still sitting beside the warm fire. After a while, the men told Frank that they must return to their campsite. Frank appeared to be disappointed, but indicated he understood. The men finished the last few drops of their brew, thanked him, and walked out the door. Frank appeared saddened, but also appreciative that he had visitors that evening. The four of them, Chris, Patrick, Dave, and Roger, found themselves still deep in the forest. Patrick once again led the pack. He did his best to recall the way back out of the woods to the main road. After locating their bikes, the men fired them up and started back down the wooded trail toward their campsite. Branches slapped at their helmets and mud was flying off their rear tires. The dirt path kept getting narrower until it looked more like a suggestion than a road. The men stopped. Roger checked his GPS. We're either in a forest or the ocean. I can't get a good signal. Patrick shrugged. Technology is not perfect. I trust my instincts. The other men all laughed simultaneously. The men continued on following Patrick's lead. They eventually stopped at a clearing to rest and try to reorient themselves. Chris killed his engine inside. Okay, who else feels like we're being watched? Suddenly, something roared loudly behind them. Dave yelped and almost fell off his bike. Nope, that's it. That's the sound horror movies start with. I'm out of here. Roger stopped and said, Now hold on a minute, guys. Maybe it's just Frank. From the trees came slow, heavy footsteps. Patrick squinted into the darkness. Guys, I don't think that's Frank. Chris stared at him. We're on motorcycles. We should just continue on. Just then, the bushes parted. Out stepped the biggest creature any of them had ever seen. At least 2 feet taller and had slightly darker hair with patches of gray on his face. It was much larger than their new friend Frank. It was enormous, at least 9 feet tall, with arms that looked like they could throw one of these 600-pound machines 100 feet into the woods. Its body hair was matted, and it smelled faintly like wet dog and pine cones. Roger whispered, That is either a less friendly Bigfoot or our new friend's dad. Chris said, Well, that explains the second bed. Patrick replied, Yeah, I'm going with the his dad theory. The creature blinked slowly, clearly surprised to see the motorcycles idling in his forest. They stared at it. It stared back. Patrick waved. Hi. Bigfoot tilted its head and snorted. Chris muttered, Why would you wave? Patrick replied, I don't know. It felt rude not to. Bigfoot took a step forward. A large branch snapped under its foot like it was a twig, and then it let out a blood-curdling roar. Roger screamed, It's coming for us! Then Bigfoot made a deep, rumbling sound, and then a large snort as if to clear the displeasing stench of our presence from its nostrils. Bigfoot pointed at the motorcycles, then at his ears, then shook his head. Patrick gasped. Oh, crap. We disturbed him. He hates the noise. Roger nodded seriously. Yeah, we're basically forest jerks. Bigfoot reached down, picked up a rock the size of a bowling ball, and without any effort, tossed it past them. It landed with a thud behind them. He pointed that way and roared once more. They all flinched. I think, Chris said slowly, that was a warning shot. He wants us to leave now. Bigfoot then picked up another rock, ready to hurl it at them. Patrick cleared his throat and said, Okay, sir, or Mr. Foot, we're leaving. We apologize for the noise, the pollution, and that one time Roger revved his engine for no reason. It pointed down the trail, then made a sweeping motion to the left. Roger blinked. Is it giving us directions? Or a head start, Chris added. Bigfoot nodded once and snorted in aggravation. Not wanting to push their luck, the men started their bikes and very slowly engaged first gear. Bigfoot covered its ears and winced. Sorry, Patrick yelled, after he had accidentally hit the horn button. This increased its agitation. Just then, their new friend Frank appeared behind the larger creature. He seemed to try and distract him while the men started to ride away. The two wrestled for a minute, giving the men a head start. The older creature motioned to the younger of the two to chase the men. When Frank refused, the larger grew angry. For a brief moment, Chris thought again, maybe I should help Frank. He then remembered how badly he had lost at arm wrestling Frank and quickly cleared that image out of his head. The larger creature broke away from Frank and began to run toward them, gaining on them with every stride of its massive legs. He seemed to be more interested in catching Patrick for hitting the horn. The forest floor quaking under his feet, he was able to keep up with the group for quite a distance. They rode feverishly at uncomfortable speeds until the narrow trail widened and led straight back to the main road. They continued on, disregarding the equipment they had left behind at the campsite. They eventually lost sight of him. They stopped at what felt like miles away, breathing hard. Roger broke the silence, laughed, and said, So, we met Bigfoot. Dave was not amused. Patrick nodded, and he was nicer than most people we've met today. Chris looked back toward the forest. Next time, Roger will choose the route. Far away, deep in the woods, something let out a long grunt. The men turned and saw Frank waving goodbye to the group. They still have no idea how he was able to reach them so far away and in such a short time. They all agreed anything is possible after the adventure they've had today. Later, sitting at a roadside convenience store, none of them could fully explain what they'd experienced that day. Was it a dream? From that day on, every so often, when the wind blew just right, they thought they heard that deep call again, far away, Frank watching from the woods. None of them ever rode that trail or spoke of that weekend to anyone. And once a year in the fall, the men meet Frank at a secluded roadside bar in the Black Hills of South Dakota. They share a pint or two and talk about the day they all met. The end. No wildlife, Sasquatch, or riders were harmed in the making of this production. Thank you all for watching. I had fun making this. I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, all. Be safe.